At Biltmore Capital, we work with a lot of wealthy families worldwide, mostly nationwide, and a question that continues to come up is what's going on, how can the markets be up 100% over the last couple of years? And a lot of people don't trust it. And this is a pretty simple chart, but I think it gets a lot of the point across. It gives the relationship between corporate earnings and the S&P 500. And as we know, in the depths of the recession in end of 2008, early 2009, we actually had one of the first quarters in economic history where S&P earnings were negative as a result of a lot of the bank write-downs of loans, et cetera. And as one of the first speakers talked about was, the economic cycle has really contracted, and these huge behemoth companies, it's like taking the Titanic and making a left turn to avoid the iceberg. They cut down on their costs. As we know, they laid off a lot of people, and they stopped a lot of the benefits, et cetera, and we saw earnings go to the moon, and thus the market has done that. And that's really been one of the keys to the cycle this time around, is the strength of the corporate sector. They've done a phenomenal job in this recovery as far as earnings. They continue to do that. 60 to 70% of companies continue to beat expectations, and we continue to think that we'll see that as we look forward over the next couple of quarters. Biltmore has a target on the S&P of about $92 a share, and what that means is that we do continue to think that earnings will continue to grow, and that always makes people feel happy and open their wallets and do all those things that I guess we do here in the U.S. When we look into what was going on, the spending on equipment and software during various expansions, we can see that this recent one has been fairly high. And I'd like to focus really in on this spending in software. And if we look out several years ago and we look at what Microsoft did, they launched, and I don't think there's any Microsoft employees here, but they launched Vista as far as an operating system, and it was a complete flop. It was horrendous. It was riddled with all sorts of errors and mistakes and locking things up. And what a lot of companies did was wait to see how this was going to turn out, and they ended up not upgrading at that point. A lot of them still had the XP systems. And what we've seen over the last couple years is, or what we've seen as of late over the past year, is now that the Windows 7 came out, a lot of these companies are saying, hey, okay, now they have their act together. And they're starting to finally do this upgrade. And instead of just upgrading the operating system, we're seeing a worldwide upgrade with all sorts of software and, of course, hardware, the computers. Of course, we have the smartphones, et cetera, et cetera. And what this has done is, in our opinion, we're in the 4th to 5th inning of a worldwide technology upgrade. I think this is one of the reasons why you see the technology sector continue to do so well as far as earnings are concerned, and why the NASDAQ continues at least to meet some new highs, at least multi-year highs. And I think we'll continue to see that as we continue to go forward. And that's really a theme of Biltmore, is what is happening here in the technology space. Unfortunately, these companies have learned to adapt with a lot less people. I guess that's fortunate for earnings, but unfortunate for a lot of the consumers and a lot of the people that are looking to find jobs. Click. Oh, maybe we're out of batteries. No, we aren't. Okay. So I like this chart, and it gives a relationship that seems to be pretty simple, but it makes a lot of sense. What this is doing is it's looking at unemployment being the orange line, and the blue line is corporate profits. And as you would suggest, there's an inverse relationship. As companies get fat, happy, and bloated, they hire a whole bunch of people they don't need, and unemployment comes up, and vice versa. When things fall apart, they typically fire a lot of people. And as we can see here from the bottom, earnings have just shot up so dramatically, as we spoke about here. But yet, unemployment has barely budged, and I think that's partially because of the adaptation and a lot of the technologies that are out there. We've seen unemployment. We think they're in the beginning stages of this turnaround. We've seen that unemployment level almost at 10%, drop to 8.8. It's back around 9. So we think that, again, employment picture will continue to get better, and we'll talk about that in detail a little bit more as we go later. One of the things that we're continue to see is private sector hiring continue to, I think, beat expectations. But state and local governments, I think that's going to be a story as we start looking over the next couple of quarters as far as those layoffs picking up. It's no surprise, being in New York and in New Jersey, that we have a lot of problems on our hands. Christie is trying to cut budgets across the board. It's a problem everywhere. It's not just a problem in New Jersey. And as a result, again, I think we're going to see more of a spiraling downside when it comes to the government sector, which is going to keep the overall job numbers, I think, somewhat muted. The government loves to talk about the unemployment rate, and as most of you know, the unemployment rate is looking at people that are actively looking for jobs and they can't find them. The U6 is an interesting rate. What it does is it takes into consideration people that might be working a few hours a week at a local fast food joint that maybe might want to have a full-time job. And those continue to be at record levels at near 17%. So one of the themes that we want to talk about is the consumer. The consumer is under a lot of stress. They've deleveraged their balance sheets over the last couple of years massively. The consumer on average has 15 to 20 lines of credit outstanding in different regards. And we've seen the consumer start opening up the wallet a little bit over the last quarter, more in autos and other areas. We saw some retail numbers come out this morning. Again, they weren't as exciting as people had anticipated, yet but the market moves up, again, for some strange reason. Again, so the consumer, while things while the consumer is certainly getting better, they're not great. As we know, the consumer lends about 70% to GDP. And as we talked about before, it's really been the U.S. corporation and the spending that's brought us out. So I think this is going to be a real key to recovery and expansion as we go forward, is really what does this consumer do? And I think when we look at the housing market and when we look at what's going on with commodity prices, it doesn't excite us very much. And we're somewhat worried about that. So with that, let's talk about the housing market here in the U.S. This is adjusted, an inflation-adjusted measure of housing prices, looking at the Shiller Index, going all the way back to the late 1800s. And during World War I, some technologies came out that made building homes much easier, and prices plummeted during that period of time. After World War II, soldiers came home, lots of babies were made, everybody was excited. End of the war, prices moved up quite dramatically. In the 70s and 80s, there were some boom and busts, and most recently, in the late 90s, up until 06, prices ran about 85%. It was really unprecedented. So they've certainly fallen quite historically, but in our opinion, if one believes in any kind of reversion to the mean, we still have a ways to go with housing. And if you're the average consumer in the United States and 70% or 80% of your net worth or more is tied up in the value of your house, when you're seeing that plummet, it doesn't make you feel very good about opening up your wallet and spending.